We're here this morning with Dan Cummings, an attorney in Naperville whose primary concentration is in the criminal defense department. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing well today, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. We're in the middle of I think right in the, smack dab in the middle, or maybe even prolonged coronavirus stay-at-home order. And so I'm seeing the economy come to a standstill, but we're dealing with it. How are things with you on your end?
Well, the courts in DuPage County, where I practice mostly, have been down since March 17th, and I think we're due to be down to at least until the second or third week in April. So just trying to do some other things with my files, not really going to court, although I'm going to go to court on Friday because I got an in-custody guy. So it's been slow, but we're trying to do other things to, keep going.
Sure. And as I was explaining to my clients, all of our lawyers reached out to our clients and we're letting them know that about 95% of what we do does not involve going to court. So that, I don't know if that's true in your practice, but that's true in mine.
Yeah, no, our practice in criminal law is really driven by court appearances, and we're going to court on clients every 30 days, so it's really driven by appearing in court. Obviously, doing other things outside of court, but the court dates are key. So,
Dan, I wanted to talk to you about a number of things today. First of all, I've known you for about, I'd say 20 years or so, but I would say that you're probably the most well-read person that I know. How many books do you read a month?
I try to read 2 to 3 a month. I mean, sometimes more depending, but I mean, yeah, I do a lot of reading. I enjoy that. So actually right now I am doing a lot of reading as well right now during this coronavirus pause that we're in.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I just, to be topical, I just read a book about the 1918 influenza outbreak. I read another book, a science book, just about influenza. And presently, I'm reading this book about 1918, and it focuses in on 3 people in Boston, Babe Ruth, a German composer, and a lawyer who went to Harvard who fought in the Great War, and it kind of focuses on those 3 people. It's a very interesting book.
What's the name of that book?
So the book is called War Fever.
Oh, it's a book about pre-World War I as well?
Yes, but it's actually like 1918, so we're just sort of, the U.S. is getting into the war. There's a baseball season going on. Babe Ruth is with the Boston Red Sox. And so I'm about a quarter of the way through it, but I think what it's going to be is the German composer ends up being arrested for allegedly, espionage and things of that nature, following along with him. And then I believe the Harvard lawyer is going to end up over in Europe fighting in the Great War. So it's well written. It's written, I think it's a guy by the name of Randy Roberts, who's a professor out of Purdue, who's written a number of history books. But so far, it's very good.
And are you reading that on Kindle?
Yes, that's really where I do most of my reading now, is on Kindle.
Yeah, it's a bummer because I would be at your house borrowing hard copy books because that's how I like to read books.
Right.
I'm in the middle of I don't know why, but I'm reading for the 3rd time Ron Chernow's book, Washington, A Life. Whenever I read that book, I get more inspired about, kind of the rugged American landscape of, where we come from and, what we need to do to get through crises. And when I read Washington, it's not a rags to riches story or anything like that, because he did come from money, but the total change in paradigm for North America from the time that he was born until the time he died was a watershed moment in the world's history. And I want to figure out how that works. So I know you've read that book, right?
I have, and I mean, he's described by many people as the indispensable American, and I can't imagine a more apt description. As a matter of fact, I would feel pretty good right now if he happened to be reincarnated and he was the leader right now. That would be good.
Yeah, the one thing I like about Chernow books, I talk to you about them all the time, Hamilton and Grant and Washington and all those books, is that he writes the books and he doesn't try to lionize these people and show only their good side. He shows their actual real side, which, the one thing about Washington is that, he had some some personality issues. He had a domineering mother. All this type of stuff that was very interesting. I like to know the inside baseball on things, and that's why I kind of like reading these books.
Yeah, well, I think in that book too, he deals with the fact that Washington owned slaves and what that means, and how to look at Washington in kind of a more rounded picture, as opposed to the guy that did or didn't cut down the cherry tree.
Yeah, exactly. So, what's very interesting to me is that this all hit, and then you went to a book on what is probably, at least an interesting parallel to this Spanish flu back in the early 1900s. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, I think the difference is what I wanted to do was find out, was there something we could learn from what happened in 1918. So back in 1918, there was a worldwide flu epidemic. We really didn't know exactly what had caused it. Really had no prescription for stopping it. And I think what we did learn a little bit in 1918 was the social distancing issue. And I guess what I learned there was that World War II and the close proximity that people were to each other in terms of armies and things of that nature really caused the spread and the contagion to kind of go worldwide.
So what years was the Spanish flu?
There were two outbreaks. There was a minor outbreak, I believe, maybe in the fall of 17. But then it came back with a fury in the spring of the following year, and it killed an incredible number of people. I don't know exactly the numbers, but it was bad. It was worse, I think, than every war that we've lost people, but for the Civil War. So if you added up all the wars that we've lost, folks, but for the Civil War, the Spanish flu in America killed more in 1917-18 than those wars combined.
Wow. So I always find the history. I know there was this new virus that we have. When I was talking to my brother, who's a physician, I was talking to him about how compared to H1N1, and he said, well, that was a flu, and this is a cold virus.
Right.
And I never knew the distinction. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how our country and the other countries of the world have handled this. But I think a review of the past flus that have taken over the world, I just reading that Washington book, Washington, went through a ton of different illnesses: malaria, dysentery, I think maybe even a smallpox. How those things ravaged the U.S. even back in the 1700s.
Right. No, so that's what I like about history. History tells you that things that you think are unique to your era, really most things, not all things, have happened in one degree or another in the past. And I think you can glean and learn certain things from the past to help you maybe in the future. I'm not sure if we can do it here, but I think certainly how leaders reacted to crises is something I hope our leaders are taking a look at today.
So, interesting topic, but maybe something we can talk about later. But what I wanted to do was introduce our listeners to you. I think you're a very fascinating person. How I know Dan is, I've known Dan because we actually met working at a homeless shelter from the 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning shift. And it's amazing the type of people you meet at those places, because usually they're thinking about somebody else other than themselves. And Dan was one of those guys. And then we got talking about books and et cetera. And then eventually Dan's son, Patrick, ended up working here at our law firm, has been here for about 6 years and has surpassed me in as far as being a great trial lawyer. He's really a great trial lawyer and just an architect on how to do these things. But I wanted to break down.
I have to object, though, that he surpassed you, Joe.
There's no objection.
Yeah, okay.
I'm running the courthouse here.
All right.
Anyway, so Dan, why don't you tell us your background? Where'd you grow up? Your family?
So I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. I grew up in a small suburb about 12 miles west of Chicago called Bellwood. Had 3 brothers, no sisters, and a mom and a dad. That's where I grew up. And Bellwood was kind of a working class community. We had a lot of factories and things in that community. I describe it as like a pink collar area. There were some white collar workers and a lot of blue collar workers.
Where did your folks come from?
My mother and father both came from Chicago. My mother's side, her parents came directly from Ireland. So my grandmother was from Ireland, from the Galway area, and my grandfather was from Mayo. Westport it's County Mayo, but the town is Westport.
Did they get married in Ireland and then come over here, or did they get married?
No, they actually met in the United States. My grandmother was a maid up on the north side, and my grandfather drove a bus for the CTA or whatever the comparable agency was back then, and then they just met. They met kind of in a church parish. That's how they met.
Wow. And how about your other set of grandparents?
They were from down in a little bit down in Ottawa, Illinois, LaSalle, Peru type area. I don't know them as well. I was very, very close with my mother's side. My grandfather and grandmother, they lived in Florida. The other side, my father's parents lived in Florida for half of the year. They were a little different. They were the lace curtain Irish in our family. We were more of the shanty Irish.
Well, so tell me about your folks. What do they do for a living?
So neither of my parents graduated from college, but my dad had done some college. He got involved in the electrical industry, transformers, fuses, that type of a thing, and did a lot of work in the steel mills in Gary and Indiana and in the southeast side of Chicago. And my mother graduated from high school, went to secretarial school, but basically she stayed at home with us, at least for a majority of the time. And
then you ended up, I'm assuming you went to, tell me about your schooling.
So I went to a Catholic grade school in Bellwood, St. Simeon's, which unfortunately is now closed. And then I went on to Fenwick High School in Oak Park, which was an all-boys Catholic school run by the Dominican order. Then in college, I went to Illinois Benedictine, now called Benedictine University, and went on to John Marshall Law School after that.
So that must have been a pretty big day for your folks to have their son graduate from law school, huh?
Yeah, well, college and law school. I mean, I was the first one in our family that graduated from college because I was the oldest. That was a big thing, not just for my mother and father, but for our, aunts and uncles, et cetera. And that was a big thing. That was something that was a goal that they had. They wanted their children to go to college to get ahead, as they said. And so, yeah, it was absolutely. And for my grandmother to see me graduate from law school was just amazing for her, having come from Ireland, and to see what had occurred once she came to America. It was unbelievable to her, really.
So tell me how your career has developed. You got out of law school sometime in the 80s?
I got out of law school in 1986. I worked for a very short time with a criminal defense lawyer, but I had put in applications to want to either be a prosecutor or a public defender in DuPage County. And one day, the public defender of DuPage County just happened to be at a seminar downtown, and he came into my office in Chicago unannounced in 1987 and basically interviewed me. And shortly thereafter got the job in the public defender's office and stayed there for about 4.5 years, wherein I worked for another criminal defense lawyer after that for a couple of years. And basically since around 1993, I've had my own practice. So I practice in an office with like 5 other lawyers. We're not partners or anything, but a lot of us do criminal work. So we help each other.
So that's been about 27 years by my math.
In private practice, yes. I've been practicing criminal law basically coming on 34 years now.
Well, and so do you like what you do?
I love what I do. I mean, it's really great that you get to do jury trials and have people listen to you. You know, a captive audience. It's great to represent people that are accused, people that the government forces are kind of, you know, they've got your client kind of in their sights. You get a chance to represent people. I really enjoy representing people, and it's people that you see oftentimes who are just devastated, have nowhere else to go, don't know what to do, are judged by maybe the worst day of their life. So yeah, I really do enjoy doing it and helping them and helping their families.
One of the things that I've done, made a practice in our office, is that if anybody of my clients, they call and they've got some sort of criminal defense, anywhere from, you know, driving offenses to other times when, you know, they're basically going to cross paths with the forces of the state or local folks or even federal groups. I send them on to Dan for consultation. Where can they reach you, Dan?
So I can be reached, you mean like my phone number and email and things of that nature? Well, my phone number is 630-531-0015. I can be reached at email dcummi7705@aol.com. I also have a Facebook page that people can access by just Google. Those are the ways generally.
Okay, great. And then tell me about the economics of it, with respect to when somebody wants to call you or meet with you. What kind of fee structure are we talking about?
Well, there's always a free consultation. So I have people come into the office and discuss their case with me, and I'll spend as much time as they want. And that's complimentary. That's not a charge. And then depending on the charge, normally in criminal law, the history of what we've been doing and in our practice, there's usually a flat rate of some amount depending on the case, depending on the amount of hours.
Okay. All right. So then, but the thing that I wanted to know was that if somebody wanted to call Dan Cummings and get a consultation, that's free, right?
I'm not sure what that was there.
Yeah, that if somebody wanted to call Dan Cummings and reach out to you for a consultation,
Absolutely.
That's free, right? Okay, great. And so there's no downside to calling you and at least consulting with you. And if you can't handle something either in the state or some other state, I'm sure you're in a network of people that does your line of work.
Yes, I'm in the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, so I go to about 3 conferences a year. And I have access to lawyers in all 50 states that do the kind of work that. If you have a case in Michigan, as a matter of fact, I've handled cases in Michigan, federal cases, where I'll get involved, but I'll bring a lawyer in from the local area and handle the case that way. So, you know, we do it that way, or I just send those people to those lawyers in those states.
One of the things I like to ask guests when I interview them is, you know, about some defining moments in their life. Are there a few that you can, you know, I know there's probably been a ton of different defining moments in your life, Dan, but can you talk to me about one or two?
Well, I think the biggest defining moment was growing up in the family that I grew up in, and the relationship I had with my mother, who obviously had to steer five boys or men in her household, and just things that she would say and things that she would do, identifying for me what was important. And she always told us that she said, no one's better than you, but you're not better than anybody else either. And that was an Irish thing, I think, because of the immigrant experience that they had, that they always wanted us to try to get ahead and do it fairly and squarely. And they truly believed, both of my parents, in the American dream. So growing up with them was very important. In addition, I had an uncle, Uncle Pat Rogers, who was a great influence on my life. He was a high school teacher in the inner city of Chicago, who was a tremendous reader, great athlete, smart guy, had been in the Navy. We lived in the same town as him, and he was really a mentor to me as far as reading and trying to, beyond what my parents said, trying to become educated, to do something important in terms of educating yourself and being able to help people in that regard. So he was important.
So the question that I really want to know from you is, what got into you to become the voracious reader that you are? How old were you when you started saying, listen, this is really something that I really want to do?
Well, I was probably in I don't know, probably high school, I would say, where I would go over and talk to my uncle, because again, as I said, they lived in the same town, and my best friend is his son, my cousin Johnny Rogers. And we would discuss, he would recommend books for us to read, and then we would discuss them with him. And I just found it fascinating, politics, history, economics. It was even more than what my parents had really recommended. And he was reading these books, and he was discussing these books with his students down at Wells High School in Chicago. So I would say he was as influential, really, as even my parents.
Wow. So, and is he still living?
No, he's not living. He had died recently. He was a character, though. He was a boxing champion in the Navy. So he was like what I really liked about him was he was an athlete. He was a tough guy, and but also an intellectual. So I kind of liked that sort of combination of things. It wasn't like, oh, if you were going to be smart and an intellectual, you couldn't also be an athlete or be a guy's guy. But that's what he was. So I enjoyed him my whole life.
So that he's kind of like what they would call a Renaissance man.
Well, I think so. He was yes. I mean, yes, that's true. I don't know if he liked that. I don't know if he actually liked that description of himself, but because when you talk about Renaissance man, he would describe stories, and because my father and him were also good friends, but they came from a really poor background in the city, and he would describe things like that they would play tackle football in the street on the asphalt, and that doesn't strike me as a Renaissance man. I don't know if that kind of computes, but yeah, but they were interesting guys. My dad and my uncle and their group of friends, which I would see them, a couple times a year, and they were fascinating people.
One of the things I always like to ask people as well is maybe a defining moment in your professional career. I know that you've had a lot of trials, some famous trials, some famous cases, etc. But sometimes it's when I interview people, sometimes it's a smaller case that they had that really meant something to somebody or that type of thing. But how about you? Can you share with us any one of the many defining moments of your career?
Yeah, I think one of the cases that I'll never forget was a young man who went to a Naperville high school who got involved with a guy, and my client's role was basically driving this fella to a store where this fella would then go and sell drugs, and my client would get $10 or $15 for driving him, having no idea of exactly what the guy was selling or how hooked up he was in this particular offense. And he got arrested one day, and he was looking at 9 to 40 years. Okay, and these were like Naperville people, like people we know, neighbors who had dreams of their child going to college. He was on the baseball team at the high school. It was just a devastating thing for these parents, and ultimately, through a lot of litigation and a lot of work, we were able to actually get the case down to a misdemeanor, where the kid got court supervision and ultimately had the arrest expunged, etc. And I still hear from these people all the time about having basically, saved the way they say to save their son's life. So those are important cases because it really shows you the impact you could have in particular cases, and how things can go one way or another depending on kind of work that you do. So that was a case that I was very proud of, to be honest with you, and made me reflect on how important what it is we do is. So I don't know if that answers it for you, but
no, that is exactly what I'm talking about. Some of the things that I try and think about is that every single case that our firm represents somebody is these people's most important thing in their life.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things that we constantly think about is that every family is their own economy. And, I'm arguing over economic issues with insurance companies, and you're dealing with people that their freedom is in jeopardy. They're going to be going to live somewhere where they don't want to live for a long time and be told to get up, to eat, to go to sleep, to move by somebody else over and over again. And to me, that is an awesome responsibility to take on the state, because typically, I'm assuming your first call, or when you talk to the police officers or the prosecuting attorneys, they're telling you there's no way you're going to win the case, right?
There's no way you're going to win the case. And in a lot of cases, there's no way you're going to avoid jail, and there's no way you're going to avoid a conviction. Obviously, they believe in their cases when they file them. But on the point that you were making about how important each case is for each client, I probably handled over 20 murder cases in my career, and I've realized that every case for my client is a murder case. In other words, it's every case. It may not be a murder case. It may be a driving while license revoked case. It may be a DUI case. It may be a theft case. But for them, literally, it's the most important thing going in their life, because if something bad happens, and it's not just going to jail, it could be the collateral consequences of a conviction, like a theft conviction. How are you going to work? Are you going to be able to vote? All of those kinds of things. So it is very significant. I really do understand what you're saying, is how important it is to each client, their case, even though it might not be the biggest case in your office. It's their biggest case.
So I want to close out this interview with just a couple of questions for you about how do you think that with this, people, I guess, gripe about the millennial generation, and they, to me, I don't get it, because I've got 6 kids, and they're everything from, I don't even know, Gen Z, Gen X, and I'm a baby boomer technically. We have everything in between, and I just don't see people as a certain generation or anything. But how do you think we can inspire younger folks to read?
Well, you mean to read books and to read papers?
Yes.
I think
read books. Yeah,
well,
actually read books.
Look, I think that we all are citizens of the world. That might sound corny, but we really need to understand what's going on in the world around us. How are we going to know what's going on in the world around us? It's not going to be just by going on Twitter. It's going to be reading the New York Times, reading the Wall Street Journal, reading the Chicago Tribune, finding out what's going on around you. And then, of course, for me, reading history, finding out what happened in history. Is this really that unique of a situation that we're in? Has this type of thing occurred in the past? These things can inform how we should govern, how we should lead, how we should deal with people in the future. Very little that occurs today has never happened in any form in the past. Normally it's occurred in the past, and in the human condition, we've had to deal with it before. So to me, I just think it's absolutely crucial to read and to understand and to learn.
That's great. And then, so we'll close out with this last question. Tell me about, I know that you and Regina have been traveling a little bit, and tell me about one, and I know you've probably seen a ton of places that you really liked, but tell me about a place that you really liked for the history of it and how much you enjoyed it and that type of thing that you've visited in your lifetime.
Well, probably the two places I've enjoyed the most are New York and Paris, because of the history of both those places. And the nice thing is when I do go to those places, I read about those places before I go there, because from that perspective, then you can kind of understand. It actually makes you want to read about the place. Paris is extremely beautiful. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of, marble white buildings. They basically sweep the streets and clean the streets every day, at least in the downtown area that we were in. So it's just marvelous, and I've really enjoyed traveling and reading about places that I go to.
And then New York. Tell me about the best historical place that you went to in New York.
Well, I don't know if this is a historical place in the sense because it's relatively new history, but 9/11 was one of those museum in New York, very near where 9/11 occurred, and it's a fabulous museum. I mean, I would recommend anybody that goes to New York to go there because it really captures what happened that day, and I don't know that the world's ever going to be the same since 9/11. So I think it's very valuable to go there.
And then to close out, what's your view on where we're going as a country in the next 5 years? What do you think is going to be happening in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm an optimist, Joe. So I think that we're in a transition period where we've lost a lot of our manufacturing jobs and things of that nature. Hopefully, we'll get some of those back. But I'm an optimist. I think, like you, I think I know a lot of younger people, my son, my daughter, my other son, and their friends that make me optimistic about America. There's a lot of really good young people that are doing a lot of tremendous things. So I'm hopeful. Hopefully we'll get through this crisis here and then we can, the best is yet to come, is what I would hope.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm definitely going to have you back because, the world's most interesting man is right here in Naperville, Dan Cummings, and so we will get together again and chat.
Thank you, Joe.
So much.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.